Hi everyone, welcome to the GDC Twitch channel. My name is Brian Francis. I am here today with our wonderful guest in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. Our wonderful guest is Matthew Burns of Zachtronics. Matthew, I believe it would be accurate to describe you as the lead developer on this game we're playing today, right?
Yeah, it's kind of unlike every other Zachtronics game. This is sort of like my game, I guess, in a way.
Right on, yeah. And the game in question is, I believe it's called Solitaire? Yeah? You guys just made a whole Solitaire game this time? Simple instructions?
Yeah, it's called Kabufuda Solitaire.
Oh, Kabufuda. Wait, so this is a different kind of Solitaire from...
It's a Solitaire based on Kabufuda cards, which are a kind of a kind of Japanese playing card that you can still buy today. Nintendo actually still makes them. So you can buy Nintendo brand physical Kabufuda cards if you want.
Right on. Well, normally I would love to talk about Kabufuda cards. I really hope I pronounced that right. I'm sorry if I didn't. That is actually not the game we are here playing. We're playing Eliza. Eliza, conveniently, we have the name here on the screen for us, is the latest game from the fine folks at Zachtronics. Like I mentioned, Matthew, our good friend here, lead developer. If I call it a visual novel, is that wrong? Is that not right?
That is absolutely correct. It is a visual novel in almost every sense of the term. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll dig into that a little more, but yeah, Eliza is a visual novel set in the far-off land of Seattle. In fact, I got a really eerie look when I went on the light rail in this game, and I was like, wait, I've been here? It is, so like I said, it's a light novel, which means it's a narrative story about a app developed for treating mental health, which is something that is happening in our real world. It's a little weird, a little prescient, you might say. It's different than a lot of the other games we've streamed, which have been kind of delving through all kinds of systems. This one shows off some of the fine writing that has shown up and interesting characters and settings that have been part of other Zachtronics games, but usually are sort of helping make the interesting puzzles take shape. But Eliza has been nominated for a couple of IGF awards, and I'm pretty sure that those awards are the IGF Award for Excellence in Narrative and the Seamus McNally Grand Prize. That's right?
Yeah.
Yeah. With that in mind, we are here today with Matthew to take your questions and my questions and everyone's questions, whoever's questions. We are here today as we play the game, check it out, sort of dive through the ins and outs of the way Eliza tells its pretty unique story. We are only going through, I've played about 30 minutes of the story, so if you're concerned about spoilers, we're going to go through what would I call the first 90 minutes or so, unless I get stuck on something, or I don't think there's anything to get stuck on, or if I get distracted.
Yeah, you won't get stuck,
yeah,
I don't think, unless you want to try to beat Solitaire on hard or something like that, but other than that...
Exapunks.
No. Well, it's not any Zachtronics game in that sense, right? Like, you can... It's a visual novel.
Yeah, so I'll get things rolling here with the game. Matthew, would you mind, actually, I'm going to turn the music down real quick. Would you mind just explaining to us the origins of this game and what sort of got you and the folks at Zachtronics started on a visual novel as opposed to the normal puzzlers that we see from y'all?
Sure, yeah. So, before I worked at Zachtronics full-time, I worked at a university, the University of Washington here. This was sort of in between, like, working on AAA games and the other stuff that I was doing. And as part of that academic job, I saw a bunch of different technologies that were in development, having to do with, like, trying to apply game technologies to, like, health and education and things like that. So while I was there, one of the demos that I saw was this, like, kind of virtual therapist application thing that people were working on, where there was, like, an avatar, like a Second Life looking avatar that would, like, interview you about your day or whatever. And this was in 2014, and I remember seeing that demo and just being like, that's such a wild thing. Like, it just struck me in a certain way. It seemed kind of dystopian. It seemed just like an interesting story. Like, I had this idea for, like, just this scene of, like, someone talking about some very, very deep topics about themselves. You know, when you go to therapy, sometimes you access some really deep things, and then it's just like this Amazon Alexa on the other side of it. You know, it was just like not like that's the contrast between those things is so great. So I was like thinking about like telling a story about this, and so I on my own time I always do my own writing. I have some Twine games that I've made, and so I thought, well, maybe I'll do a Twine game about this, where you are talking to a virtual therapist, or where someone is talking to a virtual therapist, and maybe you work at the office and you are like applying AI therapy to people, like you don't actually do therapy on your own, but you like are the vector for this AI to do therapy to people. So I kind of worked out that basic premise in Twine form. I still have some of the Twine prototypes that I made. There are like 2 or 3 of them, and the basic like format of the game was actually all just done in Twine. So there's a very early one where it's just like you're sitting in your office and then you have a couple options of like look out the window, do another therapy session, go into the kitchen and see if there's cookies, things like that. And so I was working on this again in my own time, and then around the time after we shipped Opus Magnum, I think in like 2016, at Zachtronics, I was talking to Zach, and we were just chatting about stuff, and I was like, well, I'm working on this story about this virtual therapist, and it would be cool to do it as like a visual novel with some art, and you know, if we could get some actors in and things like that. And Zach was just kind of like, yeah, let's do it. Like, let's give it a try. I mean, so because I had this kind of fully formed idea already, that, yeah, I mean, it wasn't fully formed, but it was pretty well formed, and I had a lot of the script done already. So it wasn't you know, hugely risky, because to him, for his part of it, visual novels is very simple. There's no, you know, he doesn't really have to like think about like the design space of it too much. There was some user interface work, obviously, but there wasn't like this, you know, big design space that he needed to explore, anything like that. Like, by saying it's going to be a visual novel, kind of grounds it in an established genre, you know, an established style. So it was pretty easy to think about doing at that point.
Yeah. Let's talk about the visual novelness of it, and how there's still kind of a sense of interaction with this game that means you're not just sort of clicking through dialogue, and you're not making a lot of choices. Like, there's some light branching that I've encountered so far. But I want to talk about what we're looking at here on screen, which is the dialogue that's playing as, you know, the character here is explaining their problems to you. You, the character, you're not just, you're playing as Evelyn, who is using the Eliza interface to interact with this person. So right now things feel very on rails, but early on there's a lot of talk about something that feels like it will be a choice, which is the idea of you're supposed to be reading off this script here that I'm mousing over, and then down here obviously the text is popping up, and in the very first conversation the character here trying to help begs you to go off script, and the software prompts you to go off script by staying on script, by saying things that seem off script. So
Correct, yeah.
there's a kind of this loop that, even though nothing has changed in the scripting and the formatting and the string of pearls that you're constructing, there's an illusion. The player is suddenly conscious of control and what they have choice over in a way that a lot of other games like to make big statements about, but this one sort of does just by railroading right through the conversation. How did you sort of come to that? So there is design space, right? Like, even though there's not a lot of, even though this doesn't choose your own adventure, there's still the player's brain is being wrapped around the idea of what choices they have the ability to make and how that affects these characters. I'm speaking broadly.
Totally.
It's easier to go into specifics, but what were your thoughts about that when you were making it?
I think I didn't have this term when I was doing it, but I feel like if interactive design is like giving people choices, or is about giving people choices, then taking choices away is kind of like the negative space of game design in a way. And that can be very powerful to say that, in this instance you don't have any choices. And so there actually was, I played around with a couple different ideas of like how these therapy sessions would actually work. And in some early versions it's like, oh well, you should pick between like these three things to say, and then maybe the client feels better if you pick this thing versus that other thing. And the more I thought about that and like making therapy like a mechanic, the less I liked that, because it would be making this, you'd be making the argument that like all someone needs to do is hear the right thing and then they feel better. There's a lot of there's a lot of issues around trying to like make something interactive that actually has to do with real human beings and like what you say to them and how they feel. Like I didn't want to reduce people to like these little mechanical objects that are just like, oh, you did a great job therapizing them by like picking the right things, because that's not what therapy is, right? Like, or it shouldn't be that. If you go to therapy, your therapist is not just like picking items from a menu, or I should hope not. At least.
Unless you're using one of the apps that exist now, which is
unless you use one of the apps, which is right, a whole other thing. And manualized therapy also is a thing, and so that's a whole other thing that this could be critiquing, I think. But so eventually it was just like, I think the therapy sessions are going to be completely linear. You're going to be railroaded on them. And then hilariously, you get that sort of completion screen with like little metrics and like how they rated you and stuff like that. Those are completely,
you have no agency over that.
Right? Yeah, those are completely canned, right? Yeah. Like, and it's funny because some people understand this, but like other people play the entire therapy session, click through it, and then they're like, oh, but how do I get a better rating?
Oh my god.
And it's funny because it's so ingrained in us that like, you do something and then you get your little Overwatch badges at the end, and it's just like you got this. And so those, that completion screen being completely fake is my way of like having a little bit of commentary on that, because like you had absolutely no choice. There's nothing you could have done, but you still get these like fun little instrumentalized badges and XP and stuff like that at the end.
You're making me feel bad about my Apex Legends badges.
Yeah, that was fun.
We aren't looking at it right now. I wanted to talk about the interface too. You said Zach, had a lot less to do this time, but he did some UI work on this. This UI is really simple. This is sort of a little standard. I like the nice pagey kind of feeling here along the top of the UI. But when you're in there's a couple really cool things happening, which is on the left, there's kind of some prompts that are firing off. On the left side of the screen, which is what we over here, there's the prompts that are firing off that are like positive or negative responses to the dialogue. Over here, there's kind of like this thing, like their audio inflection. I was really surprised that the waveforms on this seem to be lining up, and I was surprised at how there were all these little things firing over here, positive, negative, on the dialogue. And it wasn't just generic flow, like it felt really immersive for even though this was in such an intimate moment. How much work did that take?
It was a fair amount of work to hook that all up. All of those, all of those metrics and things like that are pretty fake. They're kind of like fluttering around and just there to make you feel like it's doing something. That even comes up in the story that like if all you really have to do is say exactly what the AI tells you to, you don't actually really need all of those metrics, right? Like if this job really existed, you wouldn't need to like actually have all of that information. But the headset, the fictional headset that you put on, shows all that stuff just to kind of like make you think that it's doing something. It's sort of like when you when you like go to your bank's website or something, and it'll have like animations and stuff for things when it's not really, that it's not doing anything, but it'll play that animation for you anyway, just to like make you feel better about how it like can't contact the server or whatever. Yeah. So that stuff is kind of a little bit of a UX like commentary on like how we like to see that it's like so that it looks fancy, that it looks like it's doing something. And you can imagine that Skanda, the tech company in this, built all that out so that it demos really well, so that like people, think that it's doing stuff.
Right on. We're gonna shift gears a little bit here in conversation. Get back on talking about the game's narrative. If you folks have questions for Matthew in chat, feel free to drop them. I'll grab them and ask him myself. The main character of the story, Evelyn, takes the job as a Eliza proxy. In part, it seems because she seems to also be dealing with kind of a emotional or mental, I wouldn't call it a crisis, but definitely a hard time. It sort of fits the bill. And I was sort of struck by playing the first 5-10 minutes of this game how super emotionally intense it is, especially when all there is to focus on is the text and not any shiny doodads, Overwatch badges, gunplay, whatever. And I was wondering about what your experience was. I can sort of conceive of what it, sort of the writing and understanding a character and letting it flow out. But I was curious about how you wanted players to understand Evelyn in this way, and how you could help them understand her position when all you sort of have are dialogue trees to work with.
Yeah. I think, there are a lot of cues at the beginning of the game that this is going to be kind of a more introspective kind of experience, right? Like the key image of the game is her sitting on the bench, and it's this very, very blue-gray Seattle day, and there's a big focus on the kind of the clouds in the sky and things like that. Evelyn at the start of the story, I think, is sort of recovering from a depressive episode. And so there's a lot of people saying, wow, I haven't seen you in a while, where have you been, how have you been, sorry I never contacted you, and things like that, because she's been kind of just more or less moping around in her apartment for close to 3 years, which is a pretty long time. Part of that is it's really not like it's. There's a lot of reasons why that's the case. One is that it's kind of it's nice to start a story that way because she's like reconnecting with people that she used to talk to, but don't quite know. So that it's, it gives you a little bit of an excuse to like fill people in on what has happened in the past, right? It's sort of like a gentler version of like starting a story where someone has like amnesia or something like that, like the hero washes up on the beach and has amnesia, and then like everyone you meet is new because everyone in the story is new to you as well. So mechanically, like that's a useful thing. Emotionally, I think it's really important to show her kind of like getting her bearings again and making a very large decision about what she needs to do next in her life. That's where this game is basically going, is it's building to Evelyn needs to make a decision about what she's going to do for the rest of her life, or for her career. What is she going to dedicate her time and energy to? What's important to her? And having that depressive episode where she didn't have anything that she cared about, this story is about coming into the process of like discovering that again and figuring that out and making a big maybe a career change or moving away or something like that, just a very large decision that affects your life quite a bit.
Right on.
And then there's another aspect to it too, of like she's really burnt out. I kind of wanted to tell a story about people in their 30s. And so Evelyn is in her Evelyn and Ray and Nora are all in their 30s, and at least my personal experience of like kind of like getting into my 30s, I had this moment where I was just like, wow, I don't even, like, I worked really hard throughout my 20s, and I don't even know why I did that. Like, I look back and it was just like, wow, I worked very hard, and now I don't, like, what do I have? What have I accomplished by doing that? And so there's this kind of like moment of looking back and feeling burnt out and kind of asking myself why I did that. And I think that is definitely part of Evelyn's character as well.
I was, oh God, right on is such a usual thing that I reply with, and every time I say it today, I'm just horrified. Not for this game. There's nothing right on about this game. Actually, there is something right on about this game.
You can say right on. Yeah,
I can say right on. All right. So, the question that I wanted to transition to, I'm struck by how in many choice dialogue-driven games, players are often aligning different choices. Sometimes there's a moral system, sometimes there's a character system. Some really interesting games are kind of using an information system, like you want to make different dialogue choices because you're motivated to get certain information. In a game without those tangible rewards, I'm still sensing kind of a reason to pick different dialogue choices here as I play. Like it's kind of like how something like people don't say what's on their mind; they sort of translate what's on their mind into dialogue, if that makes sense. And that's true in real life, and that's true of really good screenplays. Is when you're talking about one thing, you're talking about sort of something else. And I'm curious how you approach that as a writer in this story and maybe other stories you work on too, because you've had to transition from objective-based dialogue to open dialogue as well.
I think that it was important to me to be honest in a way. Like I don't really like the idea of fooling the player into thinking that there's more agency than there really is. I would much rather say here's this thing that you have to be on board with and go along with, as opposed to saying here's this mysterious system where you pick dialogue options and then stuff happens, but you don't quite understand why stuff happened. Like maybe it's tallying points in the background, or maybe it's like you picked the wrong kind of cookie to eat so somebody doesn't like you or something like that. Like that kind of stuff feels arbitrary to me, and it feels kind of not necessarily that true to life even. So to me, I think I just want to lay it out there and say, hey, yeah, these are the things that you can choose. They won't matter in the long run. In these particular choices that you get throughout most of the game are kind of these flavor choices. You can make Evelyn a little bit more defiant or a little bit more agreeable, and these things are, the reward for picking them is just hearing the conversation go in that direction for a little while before it kind of wraps back around to what the conversation was going to be anyway. It wasn't like it definitely wasn't going to be ever going to be a story where it was like, there are lots of different routes and lots of different outcomes and so-and-so will remember that and, things like that, because I don't think, it just wasn't where this story was going, right? It wasn't like which person's life should you save or anything like that. And that kind of stuff can be very gut-wrenching if you build it up properly. Which person's life do you save? But it's also that doesn't come up a lot in real life, and I kind of wanted to ground this very much in real life. Unless you're a medical professional or something like that, but it was really about choosing what you do as a tech worker, I guess, in this instance.
Man, this is not a question. This is not a question, but an observation. I sort of think it's interesting how in this dialogue with Nora, she's talking about giving up the tech life and moving over to the artist and rocker life. But and she talks about the tech business being a business causing as many problems as it solves, and she got tired of trying to get rich, trying to get famous, trying to change the world. But there's still kind of a want to change the world in her personality that comes through right in hand, even as she sort of knocks down the job she used to have. And I think that's such an interesting and good psychoanalysis for a character, to still be fixated on something even while they're tired of it. Like I said, observation, not question. My actual question is, I think it's time to talk about text in games like this. I was watching a interview with one of the lead devs on Disco Elysium, and they talked about how they were using the right side of the screen and the lower right-hand corner in particular to be this place where to create this kind of Twitter-esque addiction quality to text. This game doesn't have that, although your choices over here do show up in the same corner of the screen that he was referring to. How did you and Zach think about this kind of process? Obviously, there's sort of a conventional visual novel style, which brings dialogue into the space of where subtitles usually go. That was something that the Disco Elysium guy brought up too, was that most games put text here because it's where subtitles go. But this isn't. Text can go anywhere. Text couldn't be across the screen. Text can be floating over people's heads. Text can, in this scene right now, the dialogue could be popping up in comic bubbles right over their heads if we wanted it to. Well, I guess if you wanted it to, I have no say in the matter. But did you think about that at all? What was your approach for making interactive dialogue?
So,
interactive text. Excuse me.
Definitely just started with the standard visual novel stuff. You know, the way I thought about it was, here's this story that I want to tell, and here are these themes that I want to explore, and stuff like that. And then the cool thing is that visual novels actually are a pretty well developed and storied genre of game, you know, and there's a grammar that visual novels have developed over the past 15, even 20 years of these you have character portraits, you have backgrounds that they exist on, and then you have this sort of text window at the bottom of the screen. And so using like established visual novel stuff was very useful for us, because it was like this way to just say, like, some of these problems have already been solved. Not necessarily solved like this is absolutely the best way to do them, but solved in terms of like, this is a language that we can use, an established language that we can use to express the ideas in this particular story.
Yeah.
So we started there, and you know, I think it works out pretty well. The dialogue looks pretty nice. The display of the character's name on the far left there kind of comes from plays. If you've ever read the script to a play, it has that kind of look to it. This was as opposed to like putting another small character portrait there, or like putting it in another like box on the screen, stuff like that. And then because this game is pretty much just a series of conversations between Evelyn and one other person. There are some exceptions, but like most of the game is a conversation between Evelyn and another person. So it kind of just worked that Evelyn would always be on the right side, and her choices would kind of be on, you know, represented on the right side, and then whoever she was talking to would be on the left side, which is kind of the, you know, in Western culture, the left side is kind of the stronger side, because you read from left to right.
Sorry, I'm just falling a little bit in love with Meredith M. Mercer, dramaturge and game designer extraordinaire, because that's an excellent title, and excellent, and his
Thank
excellent
you.
manifesto her excellent manifesto about how to play solitaire.
Right. Yeah. I'm glad you like my bit characters too.
Oh man, I just love that. I love that even in this, you know, even in like I said, I genuinely, when I was playing, especially Opus Magnum, was falling in love with the like little bits of story that were creeping in there, and I'm just loving that, like the way you guys handle devices, and you like, I love this little phone you built in. I love the clicking on buttons things. There's just like look, this little scroll bar works. Oh my god. And it looks like she's doing it on the phone. These are little details that every time I pick up one of Zachtronics game, your whole team manages to impress me with these. Sorry, now that I'm done kissing up to y'all. Okay, we're at the bottom of the hour right now, which means we have about 30 minutes left in our chat or so. Go a little shorter, maybe go a little longer, we'll see. If I can see we got a few folks hanging out. If you've got questions for Matt, or you just want to say hi, go ahead and chat. We will grab them. Right on schedule. TFK365 would like to say, as a software engineer in his early 20s, Erland's story really resonated with them. They just wanted to say thanks for making this game.
Awesome. Thank you for playing it.
Yeah.
That's really nice to hear.
Yeah. I'm going to move on with the narrative in that case, and also move on with my questions. Matt, thank you so much for putting an auto advanced text in this game. Text games are so hard to stream for the most part, and the auto advance is making it so easy.
again, that's another visual novel thing
Yeah.
that was like, over the decades they've just developed like this standard set of features that are created based on need and stuff like that. So it was really nice to use things like that.
Yeah, let's talk about the art direction for a second. I didn't put this in the notes I gave you, but and I know you weren't doing the visual art for this game, but
Yeah.
I'd love to know more about what your thoughts were as someone who had this idea for the story, and you could have gone really wild with the setting. You brought it in more to a more familiar setting. I'm curious how you then worked with an artist to go, okay, we still want things to look eye-catching and appealing, and to let the visuals tell a story too, which
Yeah.
thankfully they have been in the background here, the coffee shop, the
Right.
room that's behind this text message stuff. Oh my god,
Right.
so many cookie options. Give me a second here. But yeah, would you mind talking about the
Yeah.
art and how your process interacted with your art team?
Yeah, well, you think about what your favorite type of cookie is. I can say that we did take a bit of time at the beginning to really think about like the best way to approach the style of this, because we knew we didn't want to do like super anime art or anything like that for the story. It wasn't supposed to be like super stylized or anything. This is a story that like takes place in Seattle in modern day, right? So it's a pretty grounded story. At the same time, we didn't necessarily want like this photorealistic treatment either, whatever that even means. So we kind of settled. It took a little while, but we kind of settled on this sort of painterly, mostly realistic, but also somewhat stylized approach to both the characters and the backgrounds, and sort of taking reality and then like painting it with a little bit of a stylized eye. But other than that, kind of going for a kind of a naturalist look. I think it ended up working out pretty well. Like I think you can get like where this game is coming from by looking at the art and character portraits, which is a testament to the artists, who did a fantastic job.
Moving over to my question pile. What I will ask next is, here's one of my favorite questions to talk to writers and narrative designers about. I have a weird, big stump speech about how the incredible stories we get to experience in video games and elsewhere outside of video games, in movies and books, how the narratives and the themes and the characters that we get to encounter are often shaped and informed by the medium, and not just by the medium, but by the tools that are used to make the medium. So there's a lot of things that the average player sort of doesn't get to see about the process, if you will, that totally shapes the kind of story that comes out. You mentioned using Twine at the top. I don't know quite how you translate Twine into whatever tools you guys use at Zachtronics. Y'all use at Zachtronics. Have you thought about that at all? Have you thought about? Okay,
Definitely.
Yeah. Do you have anything
absolutely.
you want to contribute to that thought? To that jam?
For sure. Yeah. Well, so Twine. When I was using Twine, it was super early in what this was. So it didn't go directly from Twine into this.
Yeah.
When I decided like, okay, this is going to be a visual novel, then I like wrote it for real, basically keeping that in mind, that it was going to be a visual novel. I think that having that set form again really does inform a lot of things. Like, for example, most of the conversations are one-on-one. That's not necessarily a limitation of visual novels. Like some of them have like 3 people, some of them have scenes of up to like 4 or 5 people sometimes. I don't think that it always works as well. This kind of the basic visual novel conversation style is usually between 2 people. And so that form like informs like what I wrote, right? Like and how I take advantage of the strengths and weaknesses of the medium in some way. The idea of like having your phone, for example, like not all games give you like a little in-game phone, but because you have an in-game phone, I wanted to play around with having some of the conversations happening over IM versus happening in so-called real life. And then also just all these like emails that you get, right? You're looking at one right now. Someone forwards you an article that they saw in the newspaper, and that kind of like adds another dimension to the story. So thinking about like the technology that you use absolutely affects like how the story is told, and then from there like the content of it.
I just want to say thank you for being one of the there's a lot of fake newspaper articles that show up in video games. Almost none of them use the inverted pyramid that we have to use like on Gama Sutra.
Right? Yeah. I'm proud of like actually following newspapery guidelines for writing the newspaper article.
Thank you. My partner works in news too, so I'll let her know that you guys did that. Now that y'all did that. Now that I found that here, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, I'm going to as we advance. Oh my God, like. Folks, I don't know if you know, we are the Game Developers Conference. So right now, we're on the Game Developers Conference Twitch channel, watching a keynote at an in-game conference, and I think we're allowed to say we're a little far down the rabbit hole right now.
There might be a little bit of GDC in this scene.
That's fine. It's art.
Yeah, I hope Simon doesn't kill me, but there's a little bit of GDC in this.
I love it. Speaking of GDC, I'll do a quick plug for us. If you want to check out our show this year, the dates are up in the top left corner of the screen, and we hope to see you there. The award show that Eliza is nominated for is on Wednesday night of Wednesday the 18th. There's it. There's my plug. That's how I counter your putting GDC in the game.
Okay. Well, this is also kind of a TED Talk as well, so it's not. I mean, you can see the very dramatic presentation here is kind of meant to evoke the feeling of like his sort of TED Talk like pageantry and pompousness.
I would keep goofing on that, but I might get in trouble. You called them pompous. I didn't.
Okay.
I don't know if they get mad at us. I don't know.
Well, so I mean, this character is pompous, so I'm making
Yeah.
This
pompous
was fun.
People give talks. It's a thing.
Yes, it's true. I'm including myself in that. This was fun because I authored these like fake slides for him to have, and then the artist did a pass on like making them look especially like techy and kind of.
Look at the triangles, man. Like.
Yeah.
Look at all these triangles your artist did. That's what really makes it techy. And like the green glow.
Right. Yeah.
I could keep riffing on that. Let's talk about planning and producing this kind of game. Obviously, you're the lead, you're the writer. You get to say like, you get to have a lot of creative control over this thing, and you sort of get to say what's possible, what's not. Obviously, with a script that you were working from, that sort of makes it different than how other narrative games get written. But there is still a factor when you're making a game like this. Okay, we're producing this much content. It takes this much time. We can budget for this much. We have to scale for it going over by game much if something's not working. If we get stuck somewhere. How do producing challenges sort of intersect with your creative vision? That's what I'd like to know.
I think for this, it was just a matter of like really keeping a lid on the number of assets that we made. And I tried to be really careful of that and keep that in mind when I was writing the script. Like, characters and locations, like everything is pretty stripped down to like what absolutely has to be there, because the only way we would have made this is, as frugally as possible. So when I introduced like a background or a character, it was always with, there's always a very specific like purpose that exists for. And the stuff that we did that was a little bit bonus or extra was like the solitaire game, the little meditation app that you have with the pixel art on your phone. Those were like little bonus things that we might have cut if we had run overboard on some of this other stuff. But luckily, we went in. The script was basically done. The entire script for the game was kind of at a rough draft point when we started bringing on the artists and actually putting the game into production. So when we started, it was like, okay, we know we'll need exactly this amount of stuff, because the script was not like open-ended, like I don't know how I'm going to end this, and oh wait, I need new assets in order to do this. So it was actually, from a production standpoint, it was actually quite under control the whole time. But that's not always possible. I think we really benefited from having basically a finished script and having this saying right off the bat that it's going to be a visual novel, and not necessarily mechanically innovating in any particular way, right? Like I wouldn't say that this game is mechanically innovative. It's not really doing any like things that any other given game hasn't done before. It's really if it innovates in any way, it's in its content,
Yeah, that's so interesting. That's such a tough. I feel for game developers, because part of the push for any game is you're trying to make something that can find appeal, that can find an audience. One very quick way is to say we're innovating on gameplay. You're going to play something you haven't played before, and that's still true. And when you say you're going to play something you haven't played before with Eliza, that's still true in that this unique story is it hasn't existed before, especially not in mainstream games. But sometimes that's a harder sell for an audience, especially when, unfortunately, discourse or dialogue about narrative in games can sometimes go, oh, well, this could have just been a book. I don't think Eliza could have been a book.
I don't think so either, although definitely, some people, have criticized it for not being, like, mechanically innovative, right? Like, it doesn't give you any, like, fancy new, like, verbs to play with. And so I can see that, like, if your interest is in narrative games for the purpose of like creating this, cool new way of interacting and stuff like that, then this Eliza might not seem very impressive.
Yeah.
But my hope is that people can focus on the content and like think about the themes of the story and think about the characters and enjoy it on that level.
I think it's funny if I'm being sort of transparent about where advances in other games have sort of brought me as a player. I'm kind of used to the idea. I'm growing more used to and in love with the idea that if I mouse over the text or mouse over things in the scene, interesting things will happen. That one may even go back to the classic adventure game format, where like if this scene was sort of presented without the text scrolling by, you could mouse over and then maybe one of these like heads would pop up and do a weird thing or something.
Right.
But that's like, man, educational games in the day used to
right.
You've got the folks who were working on Tyranny. You've got Disco Elysium, like making it so that when you mouse over things, other interesting or interesting things happen. And the thing is, I know you know how to do that because I played The Writer Will Do Something, which was you and Tom Bissell, and that was such a cool like interactive experiment. That is also the kind of work that has been done by a lot of great authors in Twine. Shout out to friends of the show like Chris Legman, who get to do stuff like that in their works.
Totally.
So what was your thought process about, like, it's weird to say why is this feature not in the game when we just talked about not innovating on features,
right?
But I might as well ask, like, what are your thoughts about like those kind of mechanics?
Sure. I think I mean I love those kinds of mechanics, and I would say that like if it's not in Eliza, it just didn't feel right for the type of story that it is. The limited amount of like kind of looking around an environment that you can do in Eliza, it's, every so often you get the scene where you could like you can look at your apartment or you can look at the office, and Evelyn has a little line about the coffee maker in the office and things like that. Those are these little very extremely light exploration moments with no stakes and completely optional. I think my answer is just that like it's just not the type of game that I think really supports that. I think the delight of like those edutainment games. Do you remember the word edutainment that people used back then?
That was my first article for Gama Sutra, was about edutainment.
Oh my god. So that like that like when you click on something and a fun little animation plays or something like that. It's just not that. It's not really that type of game. It's not going to reward you like just clicking around on stuff, because it's, when you are attending a conference about mental health applications and watching someone's keynote speech and then running into your old boss in the lobby, as you are now, that kind of like fun exploration stuff isn't really on your mind, right? So I would say like it just comes from like the story and being embodied in that place.
Right on. Let me see here. Just clicking around my email, my work email. Man, this contractor parking is so. The job I worked at before I worked at this job, I didn't get parking when I first got there. So it's like, yeah, you're just gonna need to find street parking, and in Los Angeles, it's like, it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
It's all.
It's not the
a lot
worst.
of that.
Not New York.
No, but it's a lot of that. Like, it's funny because as you have learned in the story by now, Evelyn used to be a full-time employee of Skanda, and so coming back as a contractor, she's like kind of encountering all of this stuff that contractors actually face, and it's a contrast from her previous experience at Skanda. And I kind of wanted to do that whole like blue badge versus orange badge thing.
Which is a thing, man. That's not even just a tech industry thing. That's a game industry thing too.
It is, yeah.
I hope I don't get you in trouble right now, because I stumbled on I stumbled on something when I was looking at screenshots for this game that made me pause and ask. So our friend here is wearing the logo of a popular football team, American football. I assume you had to get clearances for that, or is this artistic interpretation?
This is artistic interpretation.
Artistic interpretation. There we go. I was curious if that was a like making things real life in games is sometimes hard because it's so hard to like recreate the branded worlds we live in.
This is I'll just say it. That is absolutely a calculated risk that we decided to take. We thought about it, and usually game makers are very, very skittish about this.
Yeah.
They don't want anything at all in any kind of capacity to possibly show up. But I thought that like by setting things in Seattle and making it realistic, why not have some real stuff in there? And we thought we were just like, it makes sense, and I think that there is a case to be made that this is allowable, right? So it's like kind of making a stand a little bit, like making a statement and saying we think that games are, the defense for artistic interpretation is games are like art, right? So they should be able to do things like this.
Yeah. And I know, obviously, like, well, a TV show would go ahead and get clearances on this. Like, certainly, independent art a lot of times also skirts the lines on this kind of thing. Often for the same reason, for naturalism. For these are the clothes people wear. These are things that this is how people look. You can't just hide that behind legal stuff.
Right. So yeah, this is kind of like our small, our small flag that we're planting and saying that we think that this should be allowable.
Yeah, it's a tiny flag. I admire it. Coming up on the end of our time here with Matthew, if you folks have questions, feel free to toss them in chat. Been a little quieter today, but I don't mind. I've really enjoyed just getting to talk, and I've enjoyed having you folks listen. For my part, I will go ahead and ask Matthew. Oh yeah, here's one. Visual novels are the visual novel style is actually a little more familiar than folks may know if they play games like Fire Emblem. If you play other Zachtronics games, its elements pop up there. The talking head and the scrolling text. And depending on how high the budget for the game is, you may have different animations that accompany those. Like even if whether fully animated or just jumping from pose to pose. Obviously, having now played more of Eliza, I realize this is sort of one face per conversation, which seems quite economical. But what were your thoughts about that? What were your thoughts about sort of making the most of a limited asset palette, which is something that visual novels do so well?
Yeah, I was hoping that it would work this way. I think it does work. I think that the actual still expressions that the artists drew and painted are actually very, very expressive. like Gabriel's face right here that you're looking at right now. I think it's actually a very expressive face and has a lot of emotion to it already. And if he was like switching between faces a lot, and as you spoke to him, I think combined with this kind of semi-realistic art style, it would just kind of like bring more attention to the fact that it's like not animated, and then he's like switching faces and things like that. So this was just it was another aesthetic decision as well as like a production decision that kind of went hand in hand, which is that I think that these very nice, expressive portraits are enough on their own, and combined with the amazing voice acting that the actors provided, I think makes these characters very rich without needing to give them like facial expressions that actually change.
Yeah. That's a nice transition for us to talk about the voice acting. I'm really curious what kind of approach you brought as kind of the person in charge of the story to go into the recording booth and hear your dialogue. What was kind of your process for working with the actors here?
So the biggest thing that I told every actor was that naturalism was the most important thing. That all of these people that we're speaking to are real people, and that it's just important for, like, if they read something and it doesn't feel right, that they can try to like say what comes to mind, like contract things or run two sentences together that are listed as separate lines in the script, or throw in pauses, throw in things like that, to try to make the dialogue just feel like people actually talking.
Yeah.
And it turns out video game voice actors don't get to do that as much as maybe other types of actors, because a lot of video game voice acting is you must say the exact line and you have to stop between each line, and there's a lot of parameters, and that's not to say that that's bad. It's just because of the way the game works.
Yeah.
They have to stick to a very, very regimented way of like kind of like saying things. So being given the freedom to open up a little bit, I think they really responded to it and gave some really amazing performances. And if they said something that was different from the script, or if they ad-libbed a little bit or added things or whatever, it was fine. I could just go back and change what the text says to match that. So it was a great process, because you feel like you're like creating the character with the actor, and not just having an actor come in and like say words and then leave. And that I think, if the voice acting ended up working well, I think it's partially because of that. It's like including them in the process of creating that character, and giving them, making them feel like they have the space to really go places and really explore things.
Right on. Okay, with that, we're coming to the end of our hour here, and I think Matthew's got to go back to, Eliza's done. There's other games that got to get made out there in the world. We're gonna quietly wind things down here on the GDC Twitch channel. Thank you all for watching today. Thank you for playing Eliza with us. This game is nominated for the 2020 IGF Awards. You will be able to watch the award ceremony here on the GDC Twitch channel. Again, that is on Wednesday the 18th. Next month, which is coming up real soon. You keep saying next month in February, and suddenly it's a few days away, because even though it's leap year, it's still, like, there's a couple of less days you get to work with. If you are attending GDC, you will be able to watch the awards yourself. If you just drop by West Hall lower level, you will see all the signage to get in there. Just sit there and watch, and hopefully Eliza wins something, but if it doesn't, another great game's going to win, because all the nominees are great.
It's true.
On top of that, I would like to recommend that if you're going to the show, you can check out Eliza at the IGF Pavilion. I don't remember exactly where that will be on the show floor this year, because things move around a little, but if you wander the show floor, you will find it. You'll be able to check out the game for yourself, and hey, maybe you'll decide to pick it up and play it. With that, Matthew, I think we ask this question every time we wrap up, but just in case, where can they find you if they have more questions about Eliza?
You can find me on Twitter at Matthew Seiji. Matthew, Seiji.
Mm-hmm.
And my website is also matthewseiji.com, and you can go there and see my other work, my short stories, and you can contact me either way.
His profile picture is of a wonderful cat. It's your cat, right?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah. My Twitter profile is a picture of my cat.
You get really nervous when you're live, like saying things that are definitive, because like you feel like you're gonna be held accountable for that later, and that must be like really onerous as a guest. But let me tell you, is like trying to host these things, making definitive statements just feels like, oh, is someone gonna come back and sue me? I don't know why I'm Scottish all of a sudden, but don't know why.
They sue you for saying that their profile was their cat.
Excuse me, that was not my cat. It was my friend's cat. He
I see.
Last year.
I see.
Yeah.
It's my cat.
I don't know if that's like just a normal hosting problem or if that's just my own anxiety. But you know what I won't do if I have anxiety? I'm not going to use a therapy app for myself. All right, that's wandering into territory I should save for off channel. But have a good day, everyone. Bye.
Bye.